The hallways of the quantum physics department at MIT were silent at 2:17 a.m. The polished marble floors reflected the dim emergency lights that ran along the baseboards, creating an almost ethereal glow in the darkness. Most of the world was asleep, but in Laboratory 12B, Dr. Thomas Mitchell stood frozen, his coffee mug suspended halfway to his lips, his eyes fixed on the computer screen in front of him. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What he was seeing couldn't be possible. He blinked hard, rubbed his eyes with his free hand, and looked again. The data hadn't changed. The simulation hadn't glitched. The numbers staring back at him weren't just surprising, they were revolutionary. But they weren't his. Someone had accessed the quantum simulation lab during the night shift, when the building should have been empty except for security, and had left behind a trail of calculations that could change everything scientists thought they knew about quantum entanglement. The Carmichael Paradox, a theoretical problem that had remained unsolved for nearly 2 centuries, had elegant notations guiding its resolution across his screen. Dr. Mitchell carefully set down his coffee and pulled his chair closer. He had dedicated the past 17 years of his career chipping away at this same problem, making incremental progress that earned him tenure and respect, but never the breakthrough that would crack the paradox wide open. Yet here it was, not complete, but a pathway so clear, so innovative, that he couldn't believe he hadn't seen it before. He scrolled through line after line of code and quantum formulations, his heart racing faster with each equation. This wasn't the work of another faculty member. He knew their approaches, their digital signatures. This was something else entirely, something extraordinary. At the bottom of the simulation, in place of a name or timestamp, there was only a simple note: time bends when you have nothing but midnight. For the next 3 nights, Dr. Mitchell arrived earlier than usual, hoping to catch whoever was making these miraculous contributions to his research project. The Carmichael Paradox wasn't just any unsolved problem. It was the theoretical cornerstone that, if resolved, could revolutionize quantum computing, communication, and potentially unlock the mysteries of quantum gravity. Whoever was solving it was either a genius or had access to insights no one else possessed. On the 4th night, he didn't go home at all. He dimmed the lights in his office adjacent to the lab and waited, a thermos of coffee on his desk. His office door cracked, just enough to give him a view of the lab entrance. At 11:42 p.m., he heard the gentle swipe of a keycard and the soft click of the lab door opening. He held his breath, waiting. Soft footsteps moved across the lab floor, too light to be one of his colleagues, most of whom were men in their 50s with heavy gaits. These were careful, measured steps. Dr. Mitchell rose silently and approached his office door. Through the narrow opening, he could see a woman with her back to him, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun. She wore a maroon MIT maintenance staff uniform, but her movements weren't those of someone emptying trash bins or wiping down surfaces. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced precision, pulling up the quantum simulation program within seconds. He watched, mesmerized as she worked. She never referred to notes, never hesitated. Each keystroke, each equation she entered, flowed as naturally as breathing. She worked for almost 40 minutes before she paused, stretched her neck from side to side, and continued. Time ticked by. Midnight came and went. The woman remained focused, unaware of his presence, lost in the complex dance of quantum mathematics. At 1:23 a.m., she stood and stretched. Dr. Mitchell quickly retreated into the shadows of his office as she saved her work, closed the program, and meticulously returned the lab to its previous state, even wiping down the keyboard and chair with disinfectant. Then, with the same quiet care with which she had entered, she left. Dr. Mitchell waited until he heard the distant ping of the elevator before he moved to the computer. The work she had left behind was nothing short of breathtaking, another substantial step towards solving the paradox that had stumped physicists since 1823. He scrolled through the simulation, noting how she had addressed a complex entanglement, a problem that had stalled his own research for nearly 3 years. He printed the work, tucking it into his briefcase. Then, almost without thinking, he took a notepad from his desk and wrote, "I see you. Your work is extraordinary. Who are you?" He left it propped against the keyboard. The next night, he waited. Again. The mysterious woman returned at the same time, moving with the same quiet precision. When she saw the note, she froze, her hand hovering over it for several long seconds before she picked it up. She read it, looked around the lab with sudden wariness, then carefully folded the note and slipped it into her pocket. She didn't run. She didn't leave. Instead, after a moment's hesitation, she sat down and began working again, though her shoulders remained tense, her movements more guarded. Dr. Mitchell watched her for another hour before he decided it was time. He opened his office door fully, letting the light from inside spill into the darkened lab. The woman whirled around, startled, one hand reaching over her bag. "Please," he said softly, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "I just want to talk." The fluorescent lights of the lab cast harsh shadows across her face. She was younger than he had expected, perhaps in her mid-30s, with intelligent eyes that held both fear and defiance. Her MIT maintenance uniform was slightly too large, as if borrowed or second-hand. "My name is Dr. Thomas Mitchell. I run this lab." He stayed where he was, giving her space. "And you've been solving the Carmichael Paradox at night." Her eyes flickered to the exit, calculating. "You're not in trouble," he added quickly. "What you've done is remarkable. I've been working on this problem for almost 2 decades, and in just a few nights, you've made more progress than my entire department has in years." She swallowed visibly, but remained silent. "May I ask your name?" he prompted. Gently, after a long pause, she spoke. Sarah Reeves." Her voice was low and measured, with the slight rasp of someone who doesn't speak often. "Do you work for the maintenance department, Sarah?" She nodded once, then seemed to reconsider. "Yes, night shift, 4 years now. And where did you learn quantum physics at this level?" A flicker of something, pride, perhaps, crossed her face. "I taught myself." Dr. Mitchell felt his eyebrows rise. "Taught yourself?" The Carmichael Paradox is considered one of the most complex theoretical problems in modern physics. Most PhD candidates can barely grasp the foundational concepts. "I read a lot," she said simply, "and I listen. The night lectures are recorded. The classrooms are empty when I clean them." He took a step forward, and she tensed again. "I'm not going to report you," he assured her. "I want to understand how you're doing this." Sarah hesitated, then gestured to the screen. "It's not that complicated if you look at it differently. Everyone approaches it from the top down, trying to solve the mathematical inconsistencies first, but if you consider the spatial dimensions as fluid rather than fixed, the equations balance themselves." Doctor, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Mitchell moved to the computer, scanned the work she had done that night, and felt a chill run down his spine. She was right. It was elegant, revolutionary, and it came from a maintenance worker who listened to lectures while emptying trash cans. "Where did you study before MIT?" Her eyes dropped to the floor. "I didn't, not formally." "High school?" A small, tight smile. "I got my GED while pregnant with my daughter." The pieces began to fall into place. "You have a child?" She nodded, a genuine warmth softening her features for the first time. Lily, she's 8. And you work the night shift, because daycare costs more than I make in a month, and my mother can watch her at night. The defensiveness had returned to her voice. Look, I know I shouldn't be using the equipment, but no one's ever here, and the simulations would just be running idle analyses all night anyway, and I... Sarah, he interrupted gently, what you're doing isn't wrong. It's extraordinary. Do you realize what you've accomplished here? She looked uncertain. I'm just following the patterns. It's like music to me, always has been. Dr. Mitchell ran a hand through his graying hair, his mind racing. The Carmichael Paradox has been unsolved for nearly 200 years. The greatest minds in physics have tried and failed to resolve it. What you've done in a few nights of unauthorized computer access could transform our understanding of quantum mechanics. Sarah said nothing, but her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. I want to help you publish this, he said. She laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. Right, groundbreaking physics discovery by janitor with GED. That'll go over well with your colleagues. It doesn't matter who you are or what your credentials are, the work speaks for itself. She studied him, skepticism written across her face. Why would you help me? You could just take this yourself. Who would believe me over you? The question stung with its raw honesty. Because that would be wrong, he said simply. And because science doesn't care about credentials, it cares about truth. For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of the lab equipment filled the silence between them. Finally, Sarah picked up her bag. I need to get back to work. I have 3 more floors to clean before my shift ends. Dr. Mitchell nodded, recognizing the boundary she was drawing. Will you come back tomorrow night? We could work together, properly document what you've done. She paused at the door. Maybe. I don't know. Sarah, he called after her, what you've done matters. You matter. She didn't respond, just slipped out the door as quietly as she had come. The next morning, Dr. Mitchell couldn't focus on his lectures or meetings. His mind kept returning to Sarah Reeves and the breakthrough she had crafted in the quiet hours when no one was watching. He found himself looking at the maintenance staff differently, wondering about their lives, their stories, their untapped potential. That afternoon, he did something he'd never done before. He went to the facilities management office and asked about her. Sarah Reeves. The office manager, a stout woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, peered at him suspiciously. Is there a problem with her work? Not at all, he assured her. Quite the opposite. I've noticed her exceptional attention to detail in the labs, and I wanted to commend her. The woman's eyebrows rose slightly. Well, that's a first. Usually, you professors only notice us when something's wrong. She tapped at her computer. She's been here 4 years. Never late, never called in sick. Does the work of 2 people most nights. Keeps to herself. Does she have any educational background in science? The manager gave him an odd look. She's a janitor, Dr. Mitchell. She mops floors and empties trash. What's this really about? He thanked her and left, feeling somehow even more intrigued by the mystery of Sarah Reeves. That night he waited again in his office, but she didn't come. The lab remained empty and silent. He felt a strange disappointment, heavier than he had expected. Had he scared her away? Had she been reported and fired? The thought made his stomach twist. On the second night, he left a new note on the keyboard. Your absence is felt. The Carmichael Paradox misses you. So do I. Dr. M. On the third night, he had almost given up hope when the lab door opened at 12:17 a.m. Sarah entered, more hesitant than before. She wore the same maroon uniform, but her hair was down tonight, falling in dark waves past her shoulders. She looked younger, more vulnerable. She saw him immediately. He had left his office door fully open, the lights on, but she didn't flee. Instead, she crossed the lab toward him, determination in every step. "I thought about not coming back," she said, without preamble. "I'm glad you did." She studied him, searching his face for something, deceit perhaps, or mockery. Finding neither, she relaxed slightly. "I looked you up," she admitted. "Dr. Thomas Mitchell, quantum physics, MIT faculty since 2008, over 70 published papers, considered a leading expert on quantum entanglement." He smiled. "You did your homework." "I always do." She hesitated. "Why haven't you told anyone about me?" "Because it's your discovery, Sarah. You should decide how it's shared with the world." She laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "The world doesn't listen to people like me. Then make it listen." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit, please. Tell me how you came to understand quantum physics while working as a janitor." After a moment's hesitation, she sat, though she perched on the edge of the chair, as if ready to flee at any moment. "I've always been good with patterns," she began, her voice quiet but steady. "Numbers, music, languages, they all follow. Rules, even when they seem to break them. In high school, before I dropped out, I had a physics teacher who noticed. She gave me books, stayed after school to explain concepts. I was going to apply for scholarships, but then..." She trailed off. "Lily happened," he supplied gently. Sarah nodded. "Her father wasn't interested in being a parent. My mother helped, but I had to work. 2 jobs, sometimes 3. College wasn't an option. But you kept learning. I had to. My brain doesn't stop just because my life got complicated." There was a flash of defiance in her eyes. "I got the job here because it paid better than fast food, and because..." She hesitated again. "Because you'd be surrounded by knowledge," he finished for her. Her eyes met his, surprised. "Yes. I clean the lecture halls after evening classes. I listen to the recorded sessions while I work. I read papers left on desks, notes on whiteboards. When most people look at equations, they see gibberish. I see music." "And the Carmichael Paradox?" A small smile touched her lips. "I heard you lecture on it last semester. You said it was the holy grail of quantum physics, that whoever solved it would change our understanding of reality itself." She shrugged. "I got curious." Dr. Mitchell leaned forward, fascinated. "And you found a solution by thinking about spatial dimensions as fluid rather than fixed. That's not in any textbook, Sarah. That's not even in the theoretical literature. How did you arrive at that approach?" "It just made sense. When I look at the universe, I don't see static structures. I see rhythms, patterns that flex and adapt. The math works better that way." She spoke with such natural confidence that Dr. Mitchell felt a surge of admiration mixed with something else, a recognition of raw, untamed brilliance that the academic world rarely encountered. "Sarah, I want to propose something." He chose his words carefully. "What you've discovered could revolutionize quantum physics. It deserves to be published, credited to you. I can help make that happen." Wariness returned to her expression. "How?" "We document your work properly. I help you format it for publication in a peer-reviewed journal. You would be the primary author. I would be listed as a contributor, but the discovery would be yours. No one would accept a paper from a janitor. They would if the math is sound, and it is. Science, at its core, is supposed to be blind to credentials. It's about the quality of the work, not the letters. After your name." She didn't look convinced. "And what do you get out of this arrangement, Dr. Mitchell?" The question was fair. In academia, altruism was rare. The satisfaction of seeing a breakthrough published correctly, and yes, being associated with it, would benefit my career too. I'm not claiming to be selfless. Sarah considered this, her fingers tapping a silent rhythm on the arm of the chair. "I would need time. My schedule. We can work around it," he assured her. "Nights, weekends, whenever you're available." And he hesitated before continuing. "There's something else. MIT has special admission programs for exceptional cases, people whose unconventional backgrounds and demonstrated abilities warrant consideration outside the normal channels." Her eyes widened. "You can't be serious. With a discovery of this magnitude attached to your name, doors would open. Scholarships, grants. Stop!" She held up a hand, her expression suddenly guarded. "I'm not a charity case, Dr. Mitchell. I don't need saving." "That's not what I'm suggesting," he said quickly. "This isn't about charity. It's about recognizing extraordinary talent and creating a path for it to flourish. The world needs minds like yours, Sarah. Especially right now." She stood abruptly. "I need to think about this. It's too much, too fast." He nodded, understanding. "Of course. Take all the time you need." Sarah gathered her bag, but paused at the door. "Why are you really doing this?" "The truth." Dr. Mitchell considered the me question carefully. "Because in 30 years of teaching, I've never seen anyone approach the Carmichael Paradox the way you did. Because science should be about discovery, not credentials. And because I believe you could change everything we think we know about quantum physics if given the chance." And she studied him for a long moment, then gave a slight nod before slipping out the door. Dr. Mitchell remained at his desk long after she left, staring at the printouts of her work. In his career, he had met countless brilliant minds, students from the world's top universities, colleagues with impeccable pedigrees, researchers with decades of experience. None of them had seen what Sarah Reeves saw while mopping floors at midnight. The next day, he couldn't focus on his lectures or departmental meetings. His mind kept returning to Sarah and her extraordinary insight. During his afternoon quantum theory seminar, he found himself scanning the room, wondering how many other hidden geniuses might be overlooking, how many Sarah Reeveses were out there, their brilliance unrecognized because they didn't fit the expected profile. That evening, as he was preparing to leave his office, there was a soft knock at his door. Sarah stood there, still in her maintenance uniform, her expression resolute. "I've thought about your offer," she said without preamble. "And I'll do it, but on one condition." Her voice was firm. "This has to remain private until the paper is accepted. No one in the department can know it's me. Not yet." Dr. Mitchell nodded slowly. "I understand. We can work discreetly. And one more thing," she added. "I need access to the computational resources. Proper access, not just me sneaking in at night. I can arrange guest researcher credentials. It would give you digital access to the labs and libraries without raising too many questions." Relief flashed briefly across her face. "Thank you. When can you start? Officially, I mean." She glanced at her watch. "I need to be on the 5th floor in 20 minutes to start my shift, but I can come back after midnight once the East Wing is done." And so began their unusual collaboration. Night after night, Sarah would complete her maintenance duties, then slip into Lab 12B, where Dr. Mitchell waited with coffee and questions. They worked in the quiet hours when the rest of the world slept, piecing together her revolutionary approach to the Carmichael Paradox. Dr. Mitchell was continually astounded by her intuitive grasp of concepts that had stymied physicists for generations. She didn't think like someone trained in the traditional academic system. She had no preconceived notions about what was supposed to work, no allegiance to established theories. She simply followed the patterns where they led, with a creative flexibility that most researchers had long since abandoned. One night, as they reached a particularly challenging section of the proof, Dr. Mitchell asked, "How do you see it so clearly? I've been staring at this problem for years, and I never once considered the approach you're taking." Sarah paused, considering his question seriously. I think it's because I don't have the luxury of overthinking. When you have an 8-year-old waiting for you, and bills piling up, and 3 more floors to clean before dawn, you learn to trust your first instinct. I can't afford to second-guess myself. There was wisdom in her words that struck him deeply. How much of academia was built on the luxury of time, of deliberate, methodical approaches? How many breakthroughs might have been missed because the right minds didn't have the freedom to pursue them? As weeks passed, their paper took shape. What had begun as Sarah's midnight insights evolved into a comprehensive framework that didn't just solve the Carmichael Paradox. It reframed fundamental assumptions about quantum entanglement. The implications were staggering. More stable quantum computing, potentially revolutionary approaches to information transfer, even theoretical pathways to manipulating space-time itself. Dr. Mitchell arranged the guest researcher credentials as promised, giving Sarah access to resources she had only dreamed of. She absorbed new information at a rate that astonished him, filling the gaps in her self-taught knowledge with formal concepts and terminology. But as their work progressed, he began to notice something troubling. Sarah was growing thinner, the shadows under her eyes darker. One night, when she nearly fell asleep at the computer, he insisted they take a break. "When was the last time you slept more than a few hours?" he asked gently. She rubbed her eyes. "Tuesday, maybe?" The days blur together. "Sarah, this isn't sustainable. You're working maintenance full-time, raising a daughter, and essentially conducting doctoral-level research in your spare time." "I'm fine," she insisted, but her exhaustion was evident in every line of her body. "No, you're not, and neither is your daughter, I'd wager, seeing her mother stretched so thin." At the mention of Lily, Sarah's defenses crumbled slightly. "She's so excited about this," she admitted softly. "She tells her friends her mom is a scientist now, not just a janitor. I can't disappoint her." Dr. Mitchell felt a pang of guilt. In his enthusiasm for her discovery, had he pushed her too hard, asked too much? "You won't disappoint her by taking care of yourself," he said. "In fact, I have an idea, if you're willing to hear it." Sarah looked at him warily, but nodded. "The physics department has research assistant positions. They're typically reserved for graduate students, but exceptions can be made. The pay is better than maintenance, the hours are flexible, and most importantly, it would give you legitimate time to work on this research as part of your actual job." Her eyes widened. "That's impossible. I don't have a degree. I don't have anything." "You have this," he said, gesturing to the screen filled with her work, "and you have me advocating for you. It would be temporary at first, just for the duration of this project, but it would give you breathing room. And what about my current job? The benefits, the stability. You could reduce your hours there, maybe weekend shifts only until you're certain this new arrangement works. It's not an all-or-nothing proposition, Sarah." She was silent for a long time, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the desk. People would ask questions. They'd want to know why I was selected. Let them ask. Science is full of curious minds. That's supposedly the point of it all. He smiled gently. "Besides, once this paper is published, no one will question your place here again." 2 days later, Dr. Mitchell made the formal request to the department chair, Dr. Eleanor Chen, a stern woman with a reputation for rigorous standards, but also for recognizing exceptional talent. He was careful in how he framed the situation, emphasizing the groundbreaking nature of the research without revealing too much about Sarah's background. "You want to hire a maintenance worker as a research assistant?" Dr. Chen's skepticism was evident in her tone. "Based on what qualifications exactly?" "Based on exceptional aptitude and original contribution to a major research initiative," Dr. Mitchell replied evenly. "I wouldn't ask if it weren't warranted." Dr. Chen studied him over the rim of her glasses. This is highly irregular, Thomas. The department has protocols, standards. Excellence should transcend protocols, he countered. Isn't that what MIT stands for? The pursuit of knowledge and innovation, regardless of conventional paths? Pretty words, she said dryly, but practical considerations remain. Budget allocations, justifications to the board, precedents being set. I'm willing to allocate part of my own research grant to fund the position initially, he offered. And as for precedent, wouldn't it be a positive one? Recognizing talent wherever it appears? Dr. Chen leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. You're being uncharacteristically passionate about this, Thomas. What aren't you telling me? He hesitated, knowing he was treading a delicate line between honoring Sarah's privacy and securing the opportunity she deserved. The research in question could resolve the Carmichael Paradox completely, and Sarah Reeves is the primary architect of the solution. That caught her attention. Dr. Chen had built her early career on approaches to the Carmichael Paradox before shifting to more immediately practical applications of quantum theory. That's a significant claim, she said carefully. I wouldn't make it lightly. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. I'll approve a 3-month trial position. After that, we reassess based on demonstrable results. And Thomas, she added as he stood to leave, if this doesn't pan out, it's on you. I understand completely. When he shared the news with Sarah that night, her reaction wasn't the jubilation he had expected. Instead, she looked almost frightened. It's really happening, she whispered. It's not just us in a lab at midnight anymore. It's real. It's always been real, he assured her. The only difference is that now other people will recognize it too. She shook her head slightly. You don't understand. For years, I've been invisible. Just another person in a uniform that no one really sees. Even here, surrounded by brilliant minds, no one ever looked at me and thought I might have something to contribute. She drew a deep breath. Being seen is terrifying. Dr. Mitchell understood then that what he had initiated went far beyond a research opportunity or a career change. For Sarah, this represented a fundamental shift in her identity, in how the world perceived her, and perhaps most importantly, in how she perceived herself. You don't have to do this, he said gently. We can continue as we have been. No, her voice grew stronger. Lily deserves a mother who isn't afraid to be seen. And she paused. I deserve to be heard. The transition wasn't smooth. Sarah's first days as a research assistant were awkward and strained. The graduate students and postdocs regarded her with curiosity and some suspicion. She kept to herself, focusing on the work, speaking only when spoken to. But gradually, as she gained confidence in her new role, things began to change. It started with a quantum computing seminar where the discussion turned to a particularly thorny problem of decoherence. The room was filled with the department's brightest minds, all offering increasingly complex solutions. Sarah, sitting quietly in the back, finally raised her hand. What if we approach it laterally? She suggested, her voice soft but clear. Instead of trying to prevent decoherence, what if we incorporate it as a feature of the system? Use its predictable patterns as a timing mechanism. The room fell silent. Dr. Chen, who was leading the seminar, frowned slightly. Elaborate? Ms. Reeves. Sarah stood and walked to the whiteboard. For the next 10 minutes, she outlined an approach so elegant in its simplicity that no one interrupted. When she finished, there was a moment of stunned silence before the questions began. Not challenging or dismissive, but genuinely curious, engaged. Dr. Mitchell, watching from the doorway, felt a surge of pride. This was just the beginning. As weeks passed, Sarah's presence in the department evolved from a curiosity to a valued perspective. Her unconventional background became less relevant as the quality of her work spoke for itself. She still struggled with imposter syndrome, still sometimes felt out of place among people with advanced degrees and privileged educations, but she no longer apologized for occupying space. The paper on the Carmichael Paradox neared completion. What Sarah had begun in secret midnight sessions was now being refined into what Dr. Mitchell believed would be one of the most significant publications in quantum physics in decades. They were preparing to submit it to Physical Review Letters, the field's most prestigious journal, when the first complication arose. Dr. James Harrington, a senior faculty member known for his territorial approach to research areas, requested a meeting with Dr. Mitchell. His concern, thinly veiled as collegial interest, was clear. Who was this Sarah Reeves? And why was she the primary author on research that overlapped with his own specialty? "I've reviewed your draft," Harrington said, his tone deceptively casual as they sat in his ornate office. Fascinating approach. Rather unorthodox methodology, though. One wonders about its theoretical underpinnings. "The mathematics is sound," Dr. Mitchell replied evenly. "As you've seen." "Oh, the math checks out. It's the provenance I'm curious about." Harrington leaned forward. "No one emerges from obscurity with a solution to the Carmichael Paradox, Thomas. That's not how science works. We build on foundations, stand on shoulders, as Newton said. Sometimes innovation comes from unexpected places," Dr. Mitchell countered. "Sarah Reeves has a unique perspective precisely because she wasn't conditioned by conventional approaches." Harrington's smile didn't reach his eyes. And her background in quantum theory, her formal training, her previous publications. The academic community will have questions. Let them ask. The work stands on its own merits. "Does it?" Harrington tapped a finger on his desk. "Or does it stand on your reputation, Thomas? Are you certain you're not being unduly influenced by other factors? She's an attractive young woman, after all." Dr. Mitchell felt a flash of anger. "That insinuation is beneath you, James, and frankly it says more about your own biases than anything else." Harrington shrugged. "I'm merely anticipating the whispers that will inevitably circulate. A maintenance worker becomes a research assistant, then promptly co-authors a groundbreaking paper with a tenured professor who happens to be single. People will talk. Let them," Dr. Mitchell said firmly, rising to leave. "The science is what matters. And if you or anyone else can find a flaw in our methodology or conclusions, we welcome the critique. Otherwise, I suggest you concern yourself with your own research." He left feeling unsettled. Harrington's implied threat was clear. Sarah's credibility would be questioned, her motives scrutinized, her legitimacy challenged, and by extension, so would his. That night, he shared his concerns with Sarah. They were working late again, though, now in a proper office with her name on the door, a small but significant change. "Dr. Harrington thinks I can't possibly have done this work," she summarized after he explained the conversation. "And he thinks you're either being fooled or compromised." She said the last word carefully, her cheeks flushing slightly. "He's protecting his territory," Dr. Mitchell explained. "Your approach renders much of his recent work obsolete. That's threatening." "So what do we do?" He considered the question. "We could delay publication, build your formal credentials gradually, establish your presence in the field more firmly before making such a significant contribution." Sarah shook her head. "That's letting them win, making me prove I belong before I'm allowed to contribute. What do you suggest then?" She was quiet for a moment, then said simply, "We let the work speak for itself. We submit the paper exactly as planned, primary authorship, my current credentials listed honestly, and we prepare for the questions that will come." Dr. Mitchell nodded slowly. "It won't be easy. The academic community can be brutally elitist. I'm used to difficult," she replied with a small smile. "I've been cleaning up after brilliant people for years. Now I get to challenge them instead." The paper was submitted the following week. The response was swift and predictable. The review board requested additional information about the primary author, specifically her academic background and previous research experience. Dr. Mitchell prepared a carefully worded response, highlighting Sarah's exceptional aptitude and the rigorous verification their work had undergone. While they awaited the journal's decision, Sarah continued to establish herself within the department. She attended seminars, contributed to discussions, gradually winning the respect of most colleagues through the undeniable quality of her insights. Dr. Chen, the department chair who had initially been skeptical, became one of her strongest advocates after witnessing her quietly dismantle a flaw in an established quantum communication protocol during a departmental review. Lily, Sarah's daughter, began visiting the campus occasionally. She was a bright-eyed, curious child who viewed her mother's new world with a mixture of pride and wonder. Dr. Mitchell watched the transformation in Sarah when Lily was present. How she stood taller, spoke more confidently, owned her place. In this academic setting that had once seemed so foreign. 3 months into Sarah's research position, physical review letters responded. The paper had been conditionally accepted, a remarkable achievement in itself, but the editorial board had requested a formal presentation before final publication. This wasn't standard protocol, but the solution to the Carmichael Paradox was significant enough to warrant exceptional measures. Sarah would need to defend her work in person at MIT before a panel of distinguished physicists from around the world. When Dr. Mitchell shared the news, Sarah's face drained of color. "A presentation? In front of how many people?" "Probably 20 or 30, including the editorial board and invited faculty." He tried to sound encouraging. "It's a good sign, Sarah. They're taking your work seriously. This wouldn't happen if they weren't impressed." She paced the small office, running her hands through her hair. "I've never presented research before. I've never even attended a conference. What if they ask questions I can't answer? What if I freeze?" "They will ask difficult questions," he acknowledged. "That's their job. But you know this material better than anyone on Earth. You developed it from first principles. Trust your understanding." Sarah stopped pacing and looked at him with eyes wide with vulnerability. "They're not just going to be evaluating the research, are they? They're going to be evaluating me." Dr. Mitchell couldn't honestly deny it. "To some extent, yes, but that's why this is important. Once you show them the mind behind the work, their questions about your background will fade into irrelevance. Or they'll decide I'm a fraud," she countered softly. "A janitor who got lucky. Then we prove them wrong." He stepped forward, his voice firm. "Sarah, you've never had the luxury of conventional validation. You've had to trust your own intelligence, your own perspective, your own worth. That's what made this discovery possible in the first place. Don't start doubting yourself now." She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "When is the presentation?" 3 weeks from now." She nodded slowly. "Then we'd better get started." The preparation was intense. Sarah had to learn not just the content, which she knew intimately, but the form. How to structure an academic presentation, how to anticipate questions, how to project confidence in a room full of people who held the power to validate or dismiss years of midnight work. Dr. Mitchell enlisted the help of a few trusted colleagues, arranging private practice sessions where Sarah could deliver her presentation and receive constructive feedback. The first attempts were rocky. Sarah spoke too quickly, her eyes fixed on her notes, her body language defensive. When challenged with theoretical questions, she sometimes reverted to intuitive explanations rather than the formal language of quantum physics. Correct in essence, but lacking the terminology that would give her credibility. "You need to speak their language. Dr. Chen advised during one practice session. Not because your way of explaining is wrong, but because they won't hear you otherwise. It feels artificial, Sarah admitted. Like I'm pretending to be someone. I'm not. Welcome to academia, Dr. Chen said dryly. We all learn to speak this way. It's a club with its own dialect, and right now, you need membership. Each day, Sarah improved. She grew more comfortable with formal terminology, more confident in fielding difficult questions, more poised in her delivery. But as the presentation date approached, a new challenge emerged. Dr. Harrington had somehow learned of the upcoming review and had requested to attend as an observer, a request the journal could hardly refuse, given his stature in the field. He's looking for weaknesses, Dr. Mitchell warned Sarah, places to poke holes, ways to undermine your credibility. Sarah's response surprised him. Good, she said, a new determination in her voice. Let him look. There aren't any holes to find. The night before the presentation, Sarah worked late in the lab, reviewing her slides one final time. Dr. Mitchell found her there just after midnight, hunched over the computer, muttering equations to herself. You should be resting, he said, gently. She looked up, exhaustion evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see all the ways this could go wrong. He sat beside her, noticing how the harsh fluorescent lights emphasized the strain of the past months. She had transformed from the cautious janitor who cleaned at night to a researcher on the verge of a revolutionary publication. But the journey had exacted its toll. Sarah, he said quietly, no matter what happens tomorrow, what you've accomplished is extraordinary. Not just the solution itself, but the journey to it. She smiled faintly. You sound like you're preparing me for failure. Not at all. I'm reminding you that your worth isn't contingent on their approval. He hesitated, then added, when I first found you working in this lab at night, I thought I was witnessing something rare. I was right, but not in the way I expected. Yes, your solution to the Carmichael Paradox is brilliant, but the true rarity is your perspective. The fresh eyes you bring to problems the rest of us have stared at for so long, we've stopped seeing them clearly. Sarah was silent for a moment, then closed her laptop. My daughter asked me something interesting yesterday, she said. She asked if I was still the same mommy, now that I'm a science person. I didn't know how to answer her. What did you say? I told her that people can be many things at once, that I'm still her mommy, who makes pancakes on Sundays and checks for monsters under the bed, but I'm also a person who solves puzzles in the universe, and that both parts are real. Dr. Mitchell smiled. Wise words. I hope so. She stood, gathering her things. Because tomorrow, I need to be both Sarah Reeves, single mother with a GED, and Sarah Reeves, theoretical physicist who solved the Carmichael Paradox. And both parts need to be real. The presentation room was more crowded than anticipated. Word had spread of the unusual circumstances. A maintenance worker turned researcher, presenting a potential solution to one of physics' most enduring problems. And curiosity had drawn faculty and graduate students beyond the official review panel. The atmosphere was thick with skepticism and anticipation in equal measure. Sarah arrived early, dressed in a simple navy suit borrowed from Dr. Chen. It was slightly too large, making her look even smaller than her 5'4" frame. She set up her presentation with methodical care, her hands steady despite the tension visible in her shoulders. Dr. Mitchell sat in the front row, offering silent encouragement as the room filled. Dr. Harrington arrived last, deliberately conspicuous, in his entrance, nodding to colleagues as he took a seat directly in Sarah's line of sight. His message was clear. I am watching and I am not convinced. At precisely 2:00 p.m., Dr. Eleanor Chen introduced Sarah to the assembled group, her tone professionally neutral, but her words carefully chosen to emphasize the quality of the research, rather than the researcher's background. Then Sarah stood, moved to the podium, and began. The first few minutes were cautious, her voice soft but clear as she outlined the historical context of the Carmichael Paradox and previous attempts at resolution. But as she moved into the core of her approach, the fluid interpretation of spatial dimensions that had first caught Dr. Mitchell's attention, something shifted. Her voice grew stronger, her gestures more confident, and her eyes lifted from her notes to engage directly with the audience. She wasn't reciting a memorized script anymore. She was sharing a discovery, guiding the audience through the same journey of realization she had experienced in those quiet midnight hours. When she reached the mathematical proof at the heart of her solution, she abandoned the podium entirely, moving to the whiteboard to derive key equations in real time. Her hand flowing across the surface with the same natural grace Dr. Mitchell had observed months ago. The room was utterly silent except for the tap of chalk against board and the sound of Sarah's voice, now firm and clear. She wasn't speaking the artificial language of academia anymore. She had transcended it, bringing her audience into her unique way of seeing the problem. When she finished the formal presentation, Dr. Chen opened the floor for questions. There was a moment of hesitation, then hands began to rise, tentatively at first, then with increasing urgency, as the implications of Sarah's approach sank in. The questions were precisely as challenging as Dr. Mitchell had warned. Established. Physicists probed for weaknesses in her methodology, questioned her assumptions, pushed her to defend specific mathematical derivations. Sarah met each question with thoughtful consideration. When she knew the answer, she provided it without hesitation. When she didn't, she acknowledged the limitation and offered her reasoning process. There was no pretense, no academic posturing, just honest intellectual engagement. An hour into the questioning, Dr. Harrington finally raised his hand. The room quieted. His reputation as an incisive critic was well known. "Ms. Reeves," he began, emphasizing her lack of title, "your approach makes an extraordinary claim about the nature of spatial dimensions. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. What experimental verification can you offer for this theoretical framework?" It was a calculated question. Harrington knew that experimental validation of quantum theoretical models often lagged years behind the mathematics, and that the facilities required for such testing were beyond the reach of most researchers, let alone someone in Sarah's position. Sarah didn't answer immediately. She looked at Dr. Harrington directly, considering her response. Then she smiled, a small, confident smile that transformed her face. "You're absolutely right, Dr. Harrington," she said, her voice steady. "Extraordinary claims do require extraordinary evidence. The mathematics I've presented today is only the first step. The true validation will come from experimental verification." She turned to address the entire room. "That's why the final section of our paper includes 3 specific, testable predictions that differentiate our model from conventional approaches to quantum entanglement. Each can be verified using current technology at facilities like CERN or the Quantum Information Center here at MIT. She walked to her laptop and pulled up a slide she hadn't shown during the main presentation, a detailed experimental protocol. "In fact, with Dr. Mitchell's guidance, I've designed a preliminary experiment that could be implemented within 6 months, requiring only modifications to existing quantum computing hardware." The room stirred. This level of practical application wasn't typically included in theoretical papers, especially from newcomers to the field. Sarah had anticipated the critique and prepared for it thoroughly. Dr. Harrington's expression tightened. And you have experience in experimental design, Ms. Reeves. I have experience in practical problem solving, Dr. Harrington, she replied evenly. Before working at MIT, I repaired industrial equipment at a manufacturing plant. Different context, same principles. Identify the problem, understand the limitations of your tools, and find creative ways to measure what matters. Someone in the back of the room chuckled appreciatively. Dr. Harrington's face flushed slightly, but before he could formulate another question, Dr. Chen intervened. I believe we're nearing our time limit. One final question, please. A woman in the third row raised her hand. Dr. Amara Okafor, a respected experimentalist visiting from CERN. Ms. Reeves, setting aside the theoretical framework for a moment, what practical applications do you envision if your model proves correct? It was a generous question, an opportunity for Sarah to speak to the broader implications of her work. She took a moment to collect her thoughts. The most immediate application would be in quantum computing stability, she began. Our model suggests that quantum states could be maintained for significantly longer periods by working with, rather than against, the fluid nature of spatial dimensions. This could potentially solve the decoherence problem that has limited practical quantum computing. She paused, then continued with growing enthusiasm, but the long-term implications are even more profound. If spatial dimensions truly behave as our model suggests, we may eventually develop methods to manipulate them in controlled ways. Quantum communication across vast distances without traditional limitations. New approaches to energy transfer. Perhaps even, though this remains highly speculative, methods to access dimensional properties currently beyond our reach. Dr. Okafor nodded, clearly intrigued. Bold visions. I look forward to seeing where this leads. As the session concluded, the atmosphere in the room had transformed. The skepticism hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had been joined by something new, genuine intellectual curiosity. People lingered, forming small groups to discuss the implications of Sarah's approach. Several approached her directly, not with challenging questions now, but with ideas, suggestions, offers of collaboration. Dr. Harrington left quickly, his expression unreadable, but his hasty departure spoke volumes. The threat he had perceived in Sarah's work had become reality, not as an undermining of established authorities, but as a genuinely new direction that couldn't be ignored. Dr. Mitchell waited until the crowd around Sarah had thinned before approaching. That was remarkable, he said quietly. You didn't just survive their questioning, you brought them into your way of thinking. Sarah looked exhausted but radiant. I stopped trying to speak like them and just spoke as myself, she admitted. It was terrifying and liberating. The experimental protocol edition was brilliant. Harrington never saw that coming. She smiled faintly. I've been working on it for weeks. I knew someone would question the practical applications. Dr. Chen joined them, her usual reserve softened by evident approval. The editorial board is impressed, Ms. Reeves. Barring any unforeseen issues, your paper will be published in next month's issue. Congratulations. The formal acknowledgement from a woman who had initially questioned whether a maintenance worker deserved a place in her department meant more than any accolade could have. Sarah thanked her with genuine warmth. As they left the building, together, the autumn sunlight was fading, casting long shadows across MIT's iconic dome. Sarah paused, looking up at the institution that had been part of her life for years, first as an invisible presence in its halls, now as a contributor to its legacy of innovation. What happens now? she asked softly. Dr. Mitchell considered the question. Professionally, the paper will be published. Your name will become known in quantum physics circles. There will be opportunities, research positions, speaking engagements, possibly even faculty consideration if that's something you want. And if it isn't, then you chart your own course, Sarah. That's the point of all this, not to force you into a predetermined academic path, but to give you the freedom to choose. She nodded, absorbing this. And us, our collaboration? It was a question he had been pondering himself. Their partnership had evolved over months of late nights and shared discoveries, professional in nature, but underscored by mutual respect that ran deeper than academic cooperation. That depends, he said carefully. Scientific partnerships often continue beyond initial publications. There's certainly more to explore in the theoretical framework you've developed. That's not really what I'm asking, Thomas. She used his first name deliberately, something she had never done before. He met her eyes, understanding the unspoken question. Their relationship had remained strictly professional, but they both felt the potential for something more, a connection that transcended their work together. Yet the power dynamics, the professional considerations, the potential perception of impropriety had created an invisible boundary neither had crossed. One step at a time, he suggested gently. Let's get through the publication, establish your independent standing in the field, then we can figure out everything else. Sarah smiled, accepting this cautious approach. Fair enough. I've waited this long for things to change. I can wait a little longer. As they walked toward the parking lot, she added, Lily wants you to come to dinner on Sunday. She's making spaghetti and meatballs, her specialty. I'd be honored, he replied, and meant it. The publication of Fluid Spatial Dimensions, a novel resolution to the Carmichael Paradox in Physical Review Letters, sent ripples through the physics community. Sarah Reeves became an overnight sensation, not just for the groundbreaking nature of her work, but for her unconventional background. The story of the maintenance worker who solved one of physics' greatest mysteries while mopping floors at midnight captured public imagination in a way that pure scientific discovery rarely did. Journalists requested interviews. Other universities sent speaking invitations. The president of MIT issued a public statement celebrating Sarah's achievement as exemplifying the institution's commitment to recognizing brilliance regardless of traditional credentials. But with recognition came scrutiny. Online physics forums debated whether Sarah could truly be the primary architect of such sophisticated work. Some suggested that Dr. Mitchell must have done the substantive research himself, using Sarah as an inspirational figurehead. Others questioned whether the solution was valid at all, arguing that such a fundamental shift in understanding couldn't possibly come from someone with so little formal training. Sarah faced these challenges with remarkable grace. In interviews, she neither downplayed her unconventional path nor allowed it to become the entire focus. She spoke about the physics with clarity and precision, demonstrating her comprehensive understanding while acknowledging the support she had received from Dr. Mitchell and others at MIT. Science isn't about credentials, she told a reporter from Scientific American. It's about observation, pattern recognition, and the courage to question established thinking. Those qualities aren't exclusive to people with advanced degrees. Her response to critics was equally measured. When a prominent physicist publicly questioned her capability in an academic blog post, Sarah responded not with defensiveness, but with a point-by-point explanation of her reasoning process, inviting further dialogue on the merits of the work itself. Dr. Mitchell watched her navigation of newfound fame with admiration. The tentative woman who had once frozen at the idea of others discovering her midnight work had transformed into someone confident in her right to contribute to scientific discourse. 3 months after publication, the experimental verification process began. The protocol Sarah had designed was implemented at MIT's Quantum Information Center, with collaborators from CERN joining remotely. Dr. Mitchell led the experimental team, while Sarah focused on refining the theoretical model based on preliminary data. The work was demanding, but exhilarating. For the first time, Sarah was applying her intuitive understanding in a structured research environment, with resources and colleagues that amplified her natural abilities. She thrived in this setting, quickly mastering experimental techniques and developing new theoretical extensions as data emerged. Dr. Harrington, who had initially been one of her most vocal critics, gradually shifted his position. He didn't offer outright support, but he ceased his public questioning and began referencing the Reeves-Mitchell fluid dimensions model in his own work, tacit acknowledgement that the approach could not be dismissed. As winter settled over Cambridge, Sarah received an unexpected letter. It was from Harvard University's Department of Physics, offering her a special admission to their doctoral program with full funding, citing her exceptional contribution to theoretical physics and demonstrated research capacity. The letter acknowledged her unconventional background and offered a customized curriculum that would fill gaps in her formal education while allowing her to continue her groundbreaking research. Sarah brought the letter to Dr. Mitchell's office, her expression a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope. "Is this real?" she asked, placing it on his desk. "Harvard doesn't just offer PhDs to people without undergraduate degrees." He scanned the letter and smiled. "Apparently they do when those people solve 200-year-old physics problems. This is extraordinary, Sarah. A validation of everything you've accomplished." She sat heavily in the chair across from him. "I never imagined this was possible. Even after everything that's happened, I still sometimes feel like the woman in the maroon uniform, invisible to everyone who matters." "You were never invisible," he said softly, "just unseen. There's a difference. What should I do?" She asked, genuinely uncertain. "Accepting would mean leaving MIT, leaving our research team in the middle of the experimental verification, leaving you." The personal implication hung in the air between them. Their relationship had evolved over recent months, still professional in public settings, but warming into something deeper in private. Sunday dinners with Lily had become a regular tradition. They had begun to build something neither had anticipated when they first met in a darkened lab. "This is your decision, Sarah," he said carefully. "Harvard offers resources and prestige that could open doors for your future work, and it's close enough that our collaboration could continue, albeit in a different form. And us?" Again, the question beneath the question. Dr. Mitchell smiled. "Cambridge to Cambridge is hardly a long-distance relationship." Her eyes widened slightly at his direct acknowledgement of what had been developing between them. Then she smiled, the full, unguarded smile that had become less rare as she found her place in this new world. "I need to talk to Lily about it," she said. "This affects her too." "Of course, take your time." But Sarah had already made her decision, though she might not have consciously realized it yet. Dr. Mitchell saw it in the way she held the Harvard letter, not as a golden ticket to a different future, but as one option among many now available to her. She had outgrown the woman who believed she didn't belong, who accepted limitations imposed by circumstances beyond her control. The Sarah Reeves who sat before him now knew her worth. She would make her choice based not on what the world expected of her, but on what she wanted for herself and her daughter. Whatever she decided, it would be from a position of agency, not necessity, and that, perhaps more than any scientific discovery, was the true revolution. That evening, as Dr. Mitchell prepared to leave his office, he found a small package on his desk. Inside was a piece of chalk, ordinary white classroom chalk, nothing special except for the note attached. For seeing me when I was invisible. The best discoveries happen when someone bothers to look. Sarah. He smiled, remembering the first note he had left beside the keyboard months ago, when Sarah was just a mystery, and the Carmichael Paradox was still unsolved. So much had changed since then. For Sarah, for physics, for his own understanding of where brilliant insights truly come from. He placed the chalk carefully in his desk drawer, a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary breakthroughs aren't found in prestigious laboratories or elite universities, but in the quiet moments, when someone dares to see possibilities others have overlooked. Spring arrived in Cambridge with a burst of renewal that seemed to mirror Sarah's transformation. She had accepted Harvard's offer, negotiating a unique arrangement that allowed her to complete her doctoral studies while continuing the experimental verification work at MIT. The prestige of her publication had given her unexpected leverage. Both institutions were eager to claim association with the physicist who had solved the Carmichael Paradox. The transition wasn't without challenges. Sarah now moved between two elite academic worlds, neither of which she had been prepared for by her previous life. At Harvard, despite her growing reputation, she still encountered professors who viewed her with skepticism, classmates who whispered about favoritism or tokenism, administrators who weren't sure how to categorize someone with her unconventional background. Yet something fundamental had changed in how Sarah navigated these spaces, where once she might have shrunk from attention or questioned her right to be present. She now moved with quiet confidence, not arrogance. Sarah would never be comfortable with self-promotion, but a grounded certainty in her own capabilities. "How do you do it?" asked Lily one evening as they walked across Harvard Yard, the historic buildings glowing amber in the setting sun. At 9 years old, Lily was perceptive beyond her years, watching her mother's evolution with fascination. "Do what, sweetheart?" Sarah asked, adjusting her daughter's backpack strap. "Not be scared of them, the important people." Sarah considered the question carefully. "I realize something important, Lily. Those important people are just people who had opportunities I didn't have. That doesn't make them smarter or better, just luckier in some ways. But they have all those degrees and awards. Yes, and those things matter. Education matters. But what matters more is what you do with your mind, not what papers say about it." Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand. "And everyone, even the most important seeming people, has moments when they feel small." Lily absorbed this, then asked, with the directness only children can manage, "Are you going to marry Dr. Thomas?" Sarah nearly stumbled on the pathway. "What makes you ask that?" Lily shrugged. "He looks at you like the princes look at princesses in my books, and you laugh more when he's around." Out of the mouths of babes, Sarah thought, her cheeks warming. Her relationship with Dr. Mitchell had indeed deepened over the past months, evolving from professional collaboration to genuine partnership. They maintained appropriate boundaries in academic settings, but their personal connection had grown undeniable. Still, marriage was something neither had spoken of. "We're good friends who care about each other," Sarah said carefully, "and he's been an important mentor to me." Lily rolled her eyes with the exasperated wisdom of a child. "Mom, he's your boyfriend. It's okay to say it." Sarah laughed, marveling at her daughter's perception. "You're right. He is. Is that okay with you?" "He explains things without making me feel dumb," Lily said after thoughtful consideration. "And he makes good pancakes, better than yours." "High praise indeed," Sarah murmured, smiling. As summer approached, the experimental verification of Sarah's theory reached a critical phase. The preliminary results had been promising, showing patterns consistent with her fluid spatial dimensions model. But now came the definitive test, one that would either validate her approach or send them back to theoretical drawing boards. The day of the crucial experiment, Sarah arrived at MIT's Quantum Information Center at dawn. The facility hummed with anticipation. Research teams from CERN and 3 other international institutions were connected virtually, their faces displayed on screens around the lab's central command station. Dr. Mitchell stood at the primary control panel, directing final calibrations. When he saw Sarah, his face lit with the warm smile he reserved only for her. Ready for the moment of truth? She nodded, her expression a mixture of excitement and apprehension. As ready as I'll ever be. For the next 8 hours, they worked. In focused synchrony, executing the experimental protocol Sarah had designed months earlier. Each stage built upon the last, measuring quantum entanglement behaviors that would either confirm or contradict her theoretical model. The international teams offered real-time analysis, suggestions, and verification as data accumulated. By mid-afternoon, the pattern was becoming clear. The quantum particles were behaving exactly as Sarah's model had predicted, demonstrating properties that could only be explained if spatial dimensions functioned with the fluid characteristics she had described. When the final measurements were complete, the lab fell silent, everyone absorbing the implications. Dr. Amara Okafor's voice broke the quiet from the CERN video link. The data is consistent across all testing parameters. The Reeves-Mitchell fluid dimensions model is experimentally verified. She paused, then added with genuine admiration, "Congratulations, Dr. Reeves, you've changed physics." The formal title, Dr. Reeves, was premature, as Sarah had only begun her doctoral program. But in that moment it felt right. Not because she craved the credential, but because it acknowledged her contribution to a field she had once only observed from the margins. The celebration that evening was intimate. Just the core research team gathered at a small restaurant near MIT. Sarah, unaccustomed to being the center of attention, found herself receiving toasts from colleagues who had once viewed her with skepticism. Even Dr. Harrington made an appearance, offering a grudging congratulation that, coming from him, felt like high praise. Later, as Sarah and Dr. Mitchell walked along the Charles River, the city lights reflecting in the water, she finally allowed the full weight of the day's achievement to settle over her. "It's really real," she said softly. "Not just theory anymore, not just mathematical patterns that might mean something." He took her hand, interlacing their fingers. "It was always real, Sarah. From the first night I found you working in that lab. The difference is now everyone else can see it too." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "Thank you for seeing me first, for believing in what I could do before anyone else did, including me." In the gentle evening light, with the sounds of the city muted by distance, Thomas Mitchell looked at the woman who had transformed from a cautious night janitor to a groundbreaking physicist, and found she had transformed him as well. His carefully ordered academic life, with its predictable rhythms and measured ambitions, had been irrevocably changed by her presence. "Sarah," he said, his voice low and earnest, "I didn't just see your potential as a physicist. I saw you, all of you, the mother who sacrificed for her daughter, the woman who found beauty in mathematics while cleaning classrooms at midnight, the mind that refused to be limited by circumstance." He paused, gathering courage. "And I fell in love with all of it." It was the first time either had spoken the word love aloud, though it had been growing between them for months. Sarah's eyes widened, then softened. "I never expected you," she said simply. "Any of this. When I was cleaning those labs at night, listening to lectures through doors, I thought that was as close as I would ever get to the work I loved. I never imagined that you'd revolutionize physics, he offered with a gentle smile. That I'd find someone who could see past all the labels, janitor, single mother, high school dropout, to who I really am. She reached up, touching his face with hesitant fingers. I love you too, Thomas, for seeing me when I was invisible. Their first kiss, there beside the river, felt like the natural conclusion to one chapter and the beginning of something new. Just as Sarah's work had closed one long-standing question in physics while opening exciting new avenues of exploration. The year that followed brought a cascade of changes. Sarah's paper in Physical Review Letters received the prestigious Breakthrough Prize in Fundamental Physics, accompanied by a substantial monetary award that provided financial security she had never known. Harvard accelerated her doctoral program in recognition of her contributions, while MIT established a special research initiative around her fluid spatial dimensions model, with Dr. Mitchell as lead investigator and Sarah as theoretical consultant. Most significantly, Sarah established the Midnight Science Foundation, using a portion of her prize money to create opportunities for unconventional pathways into STEM fields. The foundation provided scholarships for parents returning to education, created research internships for individuals without traditional credentials, and funded science programs in underserved communities. Not everyone can sneak into labs at midnight, she explained at the foundation's launch event, but everyone deserves the chance to follow their curiosity wherever it leads. On a warm October afternoon, just over 2 years after Dr. Mitchell had first discovered Sarah's midnight work on the Carmichael Paradox, they stood together at a podium in Stockholm. The Nobel Prize in Physics, awarded to Sarah Reeves and Thomas Mitchell for revolutionary contributions to our understanding of spatial dimensions in quantum systems, glinted under the ceremony lights. Sarah, dressed in a simple blue gown that complemented her natural elegance, addressed the distinguished audience with the same straightforward clarity that had characterized her work from the beginning. This honor recognizes a scientific breakthrough, she said, her voice steady. But the greater breakthrough for me was the realization that knowledge doesn't belong to institutions or credentials. It belongs to anyone willing to look at the universe with fresh eyes and ask questions others haven't thought to ask. She glanced at Thomas beside her, then continued. I cleaned university classrooms for 4 years before anyone knew I understood the lectures being given in them. I listened through doors, read discarded notes, absorbed knowledge wherever I could find it. Not because I wanted recognition, but because I couldn't stop wondering about the patterns I saw in the world. The audience was utterly silent, captivated not just by her words, but by the authenticity with which she delivered them. The Carmichael Paradox remained unsolved for 2 centuries, not because it was impossibly difficult, but because everyone approached it with the same fundamental assumptions. Sometimes it takes someone outside the established framework to see what others have overlooked. She paused, then concluded with quiet conviction. I accept this prize not just for myself, but for everyone who has ever felt that their questions and insights didn't matter because of who they were or where they came from. Knowledge doesn't care about your pedigree. Neither should we. The applause that followed was thunderous. In the front row, 9-year-old Lily beamed with pride, her eyes shining as she watched her mother transform once again, from the woman who checked for monsters under the bed to the scientist who had reshaped humanity's understanding of the universe without ever ceasing to be both. That evening, in the privacy of their hotel suite, Sarah stood by the window overlooking Stockholm's glittering lights. The Nobel medal rested on a side table, its significance still surreal to her. Thomas joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. What are you thinking? He asked softly. About time, she replied. How it bends and shifts. How 2 years ago I was mopping floors and hiding from security guards, and now you're changing how we understand the fundamental nature of reality. He pressed a gentle kiss to her temple, while still making excellent pancakes. On Sundays, according to Lily, Sarah laughed, leaning back against him. Life is strange. If you hadn't decided to work late that night, if you hadn't noticed my equations on the screen, I'd like to think we would have found each other anyway, he said. Some patterns in the universe are too significant to remain undiscovered. She turned in his arms to face him. Is that the romantic or the scientist talking? Both, he answered simply. The best discoveries happen at the intersection of different ways of seeing. Later that night, as Thomas slept beside her, Sarah found herself unable to rest. She slipped from bed and sat at the desk, opening her laptop to the quantum simulation program she still used almost daily. The familiar patterns of equations flowed across the screen, no longer mysterious, but now like old friends. She began to type, following a new intuition about how her fluid dimensions model might apply to gravitational fields, another thread of inquiry that had been tugging at her mind. As her fingers moved across the keyboard in the quiet hours before dawn, Sarah Reeves, Nobel laureate, single mother, and former janitor, smiled to herself. Some habits never changed. The best thinking still happened at midnight, when the world was quiet and the mind was free to wander unexpected paths. The difference was that now she didn't have to hide. Now the world was listening. In the darkness of a Stockholm hotel room, a new scientific journey began. Not in the prestigious laboratories of MIT or Harvard, but in the limitless space of a mind that had learned to trust its own unique way of seeing the universe. And somewhere in the quantum fabric of reality, the patterns shifted just slightly, revealing new mysteries waiting for someone brave enough to question what everyone else took for granted. 5 years after the Nobel Prize ceremony in Stockholm, Sarah Reeves sat in her office at the Reeves-Mitchell Institute for Quantum Innovation. Through the large windows, she could see the Cambridge skyline, familiar yet still somehow surprising, whenever she paused to truly look at it. The institute, jointly funded by Harvard and MIT, had become the world's leading center for research into fluid spatial dimensions and their applications. What had begun as Sarah's midnight intuition had blossomed into an entirely new field of physics, with practical applications emerging faster than anyone had anticipated. On her desk sat the latest prototype, a small metallic cube no larger than a paperweight, containing the first functional quantum reality modifier. Based on her theoretical framework, the device could create localized adjustments in the fluid properties of space, allowing for previously impossible manipulations of quantum states. The implications for computing, medicine, and energy production were staggering. Sarah touched the cube gently, still amazed that something born from numbers and intuition could manifest as physical technology that might change human civilization. As a child struggling to stay warm in overcrowded shelters, as a teenage mother studying for her GED between diaper changes, as a janitor absorbing knowledge through classroom doors, never had she imagined this future. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Thomas entered, his smile as warm as it had been when they first met in that darkened lab years ago. Marriage and parenthood, they had welcomed a son, James, 2 years earlier, had added a few lines around his eyes. But otherwise, he remained the same thoughtful, brilliant man who had first recognized the significance of her midnight equations. "Ready for the big meeting?" he asked, gesturing to the conference room across the hall where representatives from NASA, CERN, and 3 major technology corporations were gathering to discuss the implementation of fluid dimensional theory in next-generation space exploration. Sarah nodded, rising from her desk. But as she reached for her tablet containing her presentation notes, she paused, struck by a sudden realization that had been building within her for months. "Thomas," she said quietly, "I've been thinking about something important." The seriousness in her tone made him close the door and give her his full attention. "What is it?" Sarah gestured to the prototype on her desk, then to the awards and recognitions lining her office walls. The Nobel Prize certificate, the Fields Medal, the Time magazine cover naming her Scientist of the Decade. All of this came from something so simple, someone noticing what I was doing in the dark, one person who was willing to look beyond appearances and see potential. She met his eyes directly. "We're missing so many others, Thomas. So many minds like mine that never get their moment of recognition." He nodded slowly, understanding immediately. This was a conversation they'd had in different forms over the years. The motivation behind the Midnight Science Foundation and other initiatives they'd championed. "What are you thinking?" he asked, recognizing the look that meant Sarah had not just identified a problem, but formulated a solution. "I want to change how we find brilliance," she said, her voice gathering strength. "The entire model is backward. We wait for people to prove themselves within systems they can't access, then act surprised when the same demographic profiles keep rising to the top." She began pacing, her energy infectious. "What if we created a systematic way to identify unconventional talent, not scholarships that require people to already know how to navigate academic systems, not opportunities that come after someone has already overcome impossible odds, something that actively seeks out the hidden brilliance in places no one is looking?" Thomas leaned against her desk, intrigued. "How would it work?" "A network of sensors," Sarah said, excitement building in her voice. "Not physical devices, human sensors. People trained to recognize patterns of exceptional thinking, wherever they appear. In service jobs, in community colleges, in rural areas, in prisons, in maintenance staff, wherever people whose minds might change the world are currently invisible." She picked up the quantum reality modifier prototype, turning it in her hands. "We've created technology that can manipulate the fundamental fabric of space-time. Surely we can create systems that help us see the human potential right in front of us." Thomas considered her vision. It would need infrastructure, methodology, funding. "All things we now have access to," Sarah countered. "The Midnight Science Foundation could be reconfigured to support this mission. We could partner with community organizations, educational institutions, corporations seeking innovation." Her eyes shone with conviction. "This could change everything, Thomas, not just for physics or science, but for human potential itself." He recognized that look, the same one she'd had when explaining how spatial dimensions could be fluid rather than fixed. Once again, Sarah Reeves was seeing patterns others had missed, connections that could reshape reality. "The meeting can wait," he said, reaching for his tablet. "Let's start mapping this out." For the next hour, they sketched the framework for what would eventually become the Midnight Initiative, a global network dedicated to identifying and nurturing exceptional minds in unexpected places. They were so absorbed in their planning that they barely noticed when Dr. Eleanor Chen, now the president of MIT, entered the office. "I was told I'd find you both here," she said, eyeing the missed meeting with mild disapproval. "NASA's deputy director is wondering where today's presentation is." Sarah looked up unapologetic. Something more important came up. She quickly outlined the concept they were developing. Dr. Chen listened without interruption, her expression shifting from skepticism to consideration as Sarah spoke. When the explanation concluded, she was silent for a long moment. You realize what you're proposing would fundamentally challenge how talent is identified and cultivated in scientific fields, she finally said. There would be resistance. Yes, Sarah acknowledged. From the same systems that almost missed the solution to the Carmichael Paradox because it came from a janitor. Dr. Chen's mouth twitched in what might have been a suppressed smile. You never let us forget that. Do you? Not as long as I'm still the exception rather than the rule, Sarah replied evenly. The MIT president studied the notes and diagrams they'd been creating, her analytical mind already processing the implications. It would need to be evidence-based, rigorous methodology, clear metrics for success, scalable implementation strategies. Of course, Thomas agreed. We're scientists after all. And it would need to start here, Dr. Chen added, her decision apparently made, MIT and Harvard jointly implementing this initiative before asking others to adopt it. She looked directly at Sarah. You changed physics, Dr. Reeves. Now you want to change how we discover physicists. Sarah held her gaze steadily. I want to change who gets to be a physicist in the first place, or a mathematician, or an engineer, or anything else their mind is capable of becoming. Dr. Chen nodded once, decisively. Draft a formal proposal. I'll present it to both boards myself. She glanced at her watch. And I'll tell NASA you've been detained by an urgent research matter, but I expect you both in that conference room within the hour. After she left, Thomas turned to Sarah with amazement. Did the president of MIT just agree to help us disrupt the entire academic talent pipeline? I think she did, Sarah replied, equally surprised by the quick alignment. Though she's right about the resistance we'll face, this won't be easy. Neither was solving the Carmichael Paradox, he reminded her, taking her hand, or building this institute, or raising Lily while working night shifts and revolutionizing physics. Sarah smiled, feeling the same rush of possibility that had come when she first saw the patterns in quantum entanglement that others had missed. This feels right, Thomas, like something I've been meant to do all along. The natural evolution of your journey, he agreed. From being unseen to helping others be seen. The realization crystallized fully in that moment that perhaps her greatest contribution wouldn't be the fluid, spatial dimensions theory that had transformed physics, but this new mission to transform how human potential itself was recognized and nurtured. The scientific breakthroughs had changed our understanding of the universe. This could change who got to participate in that understanding. In the weeks that followed, the Midnight Initiative took shape. Sarah approached it with the same rigorous creativity she brought to theoretical physics, designing systems to identify cognitive patterns that indicated exceptional aptitude regardless of traditional educational markers. Thomas developed the institutional framework, drawing on his decades of experience navigating academic structures. The first pilot program launched 6 months later in 5 cities across the United States. Trained observers, many of them former participants in the Midnight Science Foundation's programs, were embedded in community colleges, service industries, and adult education centers, looking for the distinctive signs of untapped brilliance. Within a year, the initiative had identified its first cohort of 50 individuals with extraordinary potential. From a bus driver in Detroit with an intuitive grasp of topological mathematics, to a home health aide in rural Appalachia who had developed novel algorithmic approaches to resource distribution. Each received customized pathways to develop their talents, whether through formal education, mentorship, research opportunities, or direct involvement in innovative projects. On the eve of the initiative's first anniversary, Sarah found herself once again working late, reviewing data from the preliminary results. The patterns were encouraging. The identification methodologies were proving effective, with participants demonstrating exceptional growth when given appropriate resources and opportunities. As midnight approached, she leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a moment of reflection. The quantum reality modifier prototype sat on her desk, now accompanied by a simple piece of chalk, the same one Thomas had given her years ago when they first began their journey together. Sarah picked up the chalk, feeling its weight and texture, so ordinary yet symbolic of everything that had changed. Once, she had used chalk like this to scribble equations on borrowed blackboards in the dark, afraid of being discovered. Now, she was using her position and influence to ensure others wouldn't need to hide their brilliance in the shadows. The office door opened quietly, and Lily entered, now a poised 15-year-old with her mother's sharp intelligence and her own distinctive confidence. Unlike Sarah at that age, Lily had never had to question her right to educational opportunities or doubt her potential. "Mom, it's past midnight," she said, concern in her voice. "Dad sent me to remind you that even world-changing physicists need sleep." Sarah smiled, setting down the chalk. "Just finishing up. How's your quantum mechanics project coming along?" Lily rolled her eyes, but with affection. "It's fine, though I still think biology is more interesting than physics." "Heresy," Sarah teased, gathering her things. They had always encouraged Lily to find her own path, even if it diverged from their scientific fields. The freedom to choose was a luxury Sarah had never had at her daughter's age, and ensuring that choice for others was now her mission. As they walked through the quiet institute halls, Lily asked unexpectedly, "Do you ever miss it? Being anonymous, I mean, when it was just you and the math and no one watching." The question gave Sarah pause. She considered it thoughtfully before answering. "Sometimes. There was a purity to those midnight hours when I was cleaning and thinking, with no expectations except my own curiosity." She glanced at her daughter. "But I don't miss the limitations or the fear, and I certainly don't miss wondering how I would keep food on our table." Lily nodded, understanding. "The lady who visited today from the Detroit program, the one who was a factory worker, she reminded me of your stories. The way she talked about numbers like they were alive." "Marissa," Sarah supplied, thinking of the remarkable woman who had developed a new approach to machine learning algorithms while working on an automotive assembly line. "She's incredible." "She said something that stuck with me," Lily continued as they reached the building's exit. "She said before the midnight initiative found her, she thought her mind was playing tricks on her, seeing patterns and connections no one else noticed. She believed something was wrong with her, not that she had a gift." Sarah felt a tightness in her chest, recognizing her own past experience in those words. "That's why this matters so much," she said softly. "How many brilliant insights, how many world-changing ideas have we lost because the people who had them didn't know their value?" Outside, the spring night was cool and clear, the stars visible despite Cambridge's light pollution. Sarah looked up at them, thinking of how human understanding of those celestial bodies had evolved through centuries of observation and theory, each breakthrough building on the last, each insight precious. But who determined which insights were recorded and remembered? Whose observations shaped our collective knowledge? For too long, the answers to those questions had been limited by accidents of birth, circumstance, and social position. "I had a realization today," Sarah said as they walked toward home. "The fluid spatial dimensions theory changed how we understand reality, but changing who gets to theorize about reality in the first place, that might be even more revolutionary." Lily smiled, linking her arm through her mother's. "Sounds like you're just getting started." "Maybe I am," Sarah agreed, feeling the familiar thrill of a new intellectual frontier opening before her. "Maybe this is the problem I was really meant to solve all along." Above them, the universe continued its endless dance of matter and energy, indifferent to human classifications of who was qualified to study its mysteries. But here on Earth, in the mind of a woman who had once mopped floors beneath the great institutions of learning, a new paradigm was taking shape, one that might finally align human systems with the universe's magnificent indifference to pedigree, caring only for the patterns themselves and those who could perceive them. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.